So Nick Saban is really trying to clarify what the reason was and what the reason wasn't that he stepped down.
Yeah, so Nick Saban, and this is in a lengthy piece from Chris Lowe at ESPN, explaining his decision to retire, and it also gets into Kalen DeBoer and the pursuit of him. Some notes in there we'll get into also about Mike Norvell was way more of a candidate at Alabama than anyone probably thought. In fact, he wanted the job. I think they decided on DeBoer over Norvell, and that's how it happened. But here's the quote from Nick Saban about some of the reasons why he decided to step down and retire. He said, quote, "I want to be clear that wasn't the reason, but some of those events certainly contributed. I was really disappointed in the way that the players acted after the game." He's talking about the loss to Michigan in the college football semifinal. You got to win with class. You got to lose with class. We had our opportunities to win the game, and we didn't do it. And then showing your ass and being frustrated and throwing helmets and doing that stuff, that's not who we are and what we've promoted in our program. So Nick Saban goes on to say, "I thought we could have had a hell of a team next year," and then maybe 70 or 80% of the players you talk to, all they want to know are two things. What assurances do I have that I'm going to play, because they're thinking about transferring, and how much are you going to pay me? Our program here was always built on how much value can we create for your future and your personal development, academic success, and graduating and developing an NFL career on the field. So I'm saying to myself, maybe this doesn't work anymore, that the goals and aspirations are just different and that it's all about how much money can I make as a college player. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's never been what we are all about, and it's not why we had success through those years. I'll follow up on what Nick Saban said. It is bad and it is wrong if a player's sole motivation is making the highest amount of dollars in the short time they have in college, and no other consideration is given to anything else. Fit in a system, style, coaching fit, who they're playing with, chances to win, chances to play. All of those things are important. NIL now and how much you're making is one of the factors involved in making a decision. We can't put our head back in the sand. We can't put the toothpaste back in the tube and say that's not going to be a consideration for players anymore. But if it's the sole consideration, the way Nick Saban is claiming it's the sole consideration, I think that is a problem. He don't want to say that right now. I know he don't want to step on the toes of people who think, hey, money for college athletes is good. There's nothing wrong with it at all. And there's not. But if you have players at Alabama, and he said 70 to 80% of them are coming into my office, and they want to know if they're going to get the playing time they want. If not, they're going to bolt. And how much you're going to pay me if you're a returning starter. I don't think that's the sole reason you should be making a decision when you're playing high-level college football, especially if you're someone who feels like you have an NFL future. I get profit maximization and all of those things. You want to maximize what you can while you can. But if you're making your decision solely based on money, something we've talked a lot about, I think that is going to be a problem moving forward. And Nick Saban just highlighted that fact that it's not what we were solely about at Alabama for years. That's not to say that Alabama players didn't get paid for years. They did. Alabama players got paid under Nick Saban. But also when Nick Saban's your coach, the understanding is it is all about the team. You are here to be developed to be an NFL player and to win national titles. And we're going to be all about that. We're going to be focused on doing our job and making sure we win each and every snap. And I'll worry about the score, and I'll worry about making you a better football player. And in the end, it's going to be hell for a lot of you, but you're going to become better football players. You're going to win titles. That's the understanding for Alabama football under Nick Saban, not solely about, are you going to pay me $50,000 more than Auburn or Ole Miss or any other rival because they're offering more money right now, and I could go there and make a little bit more money.
Chad, there's a few things that pop in when I'm listening or reading this, right? Number one, this sounds more like Dabo than I ever thought Saban would sound like Dabo. That's number one. And we'll get back to that. Mm-hmm. Number two, if this will happen at Alabama, this will happen literally everywhere. If you have we're all about transferring, all about what are you going to give me? Am I going to start? And while Saban was there, he was able to maintain that until he's admitting that he wasn't able to maintain that, and he was done with it. So if Saban will be done with it, anybody will be done with it. That's number two. Number three, I wonder about the whole the collectives 2021 and the fact that there was always beneath the surface, and Chad, correct me if I'm wrong, it was more about Saban than it was the collective at Alabama. It was more about getting to the pros, making sure that you are aligning yourself with making more later, earning it here, making more later, and winning national championships. Then it was, hey, we're collective Alabama, we're collective fourth quarter, hold your fist in the air, and we're going to get paid every game, like everyone's going to church and tithing, right? That's coming back around now. And what I've heard a lot from just the old school support was, we don't have to have that same level of notoriety with our collective here. Okay, great. But I wonder now that they have DeBoer, if it's too little too late. Maybe not too little in the pocketbook, but too late behind where all the other collectives are down the path. Because really, if you didn't jump on board in 2021, you were already way behind. And we didn't start hearing about Alabama's collective until when? Like a year later?
Yeah, and
I hear this and I wonder, what's DeBoer in for here?
It's got to be,
because this is more than just Nick Saban saying what. Again, this is the GOAT. This is the coach at Alabama saying that his players just did an about face on everything that we thought they were about, which was, well, that's just Alabama. They can get any player, any five-star in America that they want, because they're going to go there. They're going to be the five-star that backs up the five-star because they're Alabama, because they're getting ready for the NFL.
Well, and it's Nick Saban acknowledging that this is a different era of athlete than I'm accustomed to coaching. And when these are the questions I'm getting in end-of-the-year meetings with players, I'm not about this life. I don't want to do it anymore. I mean, he talks a lot about, too, the thing that he's going to miss the most, the thing that he loved the most was relationships with players. Now, he also talked about other factors leading to it. He couldn't retain his staff. Guys were getting head coaching opportunities. They were getting a chance to bolt to the NFL, go everywhere else. 11 years, he had 7 different offensive coordinators, counting Tommy Rees this last year. And he said that was wearing on him because the relationship with the players meant more than anything else. But it was tough because he's having to spend so much time hiring new staff when guys are bolting and going elsewhere. So I don't think it was just the one thing. And he says, to start, I'm not saying this is the sole factor, but college football and what players are after has completely changed. And our program's not about that. And the subtle acknowledgement that even the great Nick Saban couldn't control it. Right? He's saying, I'm looking around the locker room, guys are throwing their helmet, they're making an ass of themselves because they lost. And I'm thinking, this isn't what we teach. This isn't what we're about here. But yet they're about that now because the individual's becoming bigger than the team in many instances. Lane Kiffin said this in an interview with Andy Staples of On 3 also. And I think it's, again, people might find this crazy, but Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban may kind of be on the same path here of what they're saying. Quote, it probably sounds strange to a lot of people for me to say the disaster we're in right now in college football. Some would say maximizing it as well as you can and as well as anybody they are at Ole Miss. Kiffin acknowledges that. But to me, that tells you how much of a disaster it is. Even though it benefits us at Ole Miss, I'm still telling you it's a disaster, even though it benefits us at Ole Miss a lot right now. Hey, it takes a pretty big person to admit that. This is the system that I'm benefiting from and getting great players to compete for SEC titles, possibly at Ole Miss. And I'm telling you why that system is crooked and why it's broken right now. And the biggest reason is not just because players can maximize name, image, likeness. Almost everyone now universally agrees it's okay for them to get paid on their name, image, likeness. It's the fact that there's no regulations or rules in place around it. The NCAA is completely inept at handling it. They're picking arbitrary battles to fight with individual schools. The court system has told them to stop. You can't do that anymore. They've got no answers. There needs to be rules in place, and the inevitable is there's going to be those that can and those that can't. Those that can pay and will make the money to do so through television network contracts and revenue in all sorts of ways, and those that simply can't, and those that can't are going to go away. I don't know that any of it's the best for college football as a whole, but right now it's a hell of a situation for the college football player. if you're at one of these schools.
Unlike Saban, this is where they're different. Kiffin's playing the game.
Yeah.
You know, he had how many? He had at least 10 transfers that were at least 4-star athletes in high school in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and he's admitting that.
Oh, I know.
He's saying we're playing as well as anyone here. I'm not denying that.
And I think part of it is that I think we're also seeing the exact opposite here attract each coach. Saban also knows that the 12-team playoff is coming up. So does Kiffin. That's why Kiffin has a national championship window right here. And I think Saban's viewing it as, man, this is before you had the 3-3-2-2-1 model that was been, where they're proposing this for the 14. I think Saban's looking at it as it's never going to be more difficult, and we're going to have to deal with this even more. And Kiffin's looking at it like, I've got a chance to enhance my legacy, even though I think this is going to be the downfall of this whole model that as we see it. The greed in college football, though, has started at the very top. That has led to this. And now that the Supreme Court's backing this whole model, the system, and everyone's afraid of being sued, it's wide open. And Chad, consider this too. How much that I want to this is the fascinating part. The report that Saban was interviewing for a wide receiving coach position, that's same like hours before he made this decision. And this was how many days? This is a few days after.
It was
a few
January 8th, I want to say.
Okay, a few days after.
Sorry, January 10th.
Okay.
Was when the player meeting happened.
So like a week after the locker room incident that he's talking about, throwing helmets and stuff. And he's interviewing the wide receiving coach. And 11 years, though, 11 different coordinator swaps over 11 years. Is that what he said?
Yeah, he had 7 different
in 11 years.
Not just coordinators. This is just offensive coordinator. He had 7 different offensive coordinators over 11 years.
And he was
counting
great
Tommy
at that.
Rees.
Unbelievably great at that. But he also hired guys that he knew were going to move on fast. Sarkisian, Kiffin. There have been others.
Well, here's how quick it happened. Saban's meeting with his players was at 5:06 p.m. Eastern Time on January 10th. Bama hired Kalen DeBoer, actually at 6:06 p.m. Eastern Time, so 49 hours later. On January 12th, Greg Byrne posted a photo on social media with white smoke rising from a chimney from a barbecue joint in Tuscaloosa, signaling, obviously, that the Pope had been selected. But that's when they had their guy with Kalen DeBoer.
So, but they're interviewing a wide receiving coach, and then 48 hours later, roughly, they have a new coach.
Yeah, he goes into detail. Him and Miss Terry were in Florida for 2 days like they always do, and he said we had a lot of deep conversations on that trip. And he left having not decided yet. He got there. He showed up at work at 7 a.m. like he does every day.
Yeah.
It was a very normal day. And then
maybe the interview sparked some conversation about this.
As the day went on, I think he just decided, now's the time. He said he spoke to Bill Parcells and Gene Stallings and said that, both at different times had said, you never really know, but there is a voice in the back of your head that's telling you when it's time. And that voice is usually right. And I think that voice just got louder, and he decided now's the time. He also couldn't guarantee to his coaches. He said, when I was interviewing coaches, I'm having to tell them they wanted assurances I'm going to be there 2 or 3 more years. I couldn't give them that starting the year before. Yeah, Greg Byrne knew after the previous year, too. It was year to year. He said, I'm a year-to-year proposition now. I'm not going to make any long-term commitments to anyone.
What about the reporter? Maybe DeBoer said this, that he had not physically talked with Greg Byrne until the interview.
Yeah,
in his coaching history, lineage. That's also intriguing. Now,
it's kind of odd to me that Kalen DeBoer, a guy who had not thought at all about Alabama, and he was surprised at the news of Saban like anyone else.
Yep.
He was so quickly. I mean, this should get Alabama fans excited. He was quickly all in on the idea of Alabama, and Greg Byrne in the interview even asked him what he thought was the most important question. Many are going to say it's impossible to be the one that follows a legend. You want to be the one that follows the guy that follows the legend. What do you say to those people? And he said, I'm not going to run from it. I embrace that challenge. He said, there's only one guy who gets to do it. That's the way I look at it. There's only one guy who gets to follow Nick Saban at Alabama. And if I'm that guy, I'm going to embrace it.
But there's only one. But there's many guys, though, that get raises for flirting with the idea of replacing the legend.
Yeah.
And Mike Norvell's one of them. Washington was going to have to pony up.
I think Mike Norvell, though, look, Steve, and it says it in this article, I don't think Steve Sarkisian and Dan Lanning were never an option. They were going to stay. They used Jimmy Sexton in that situation to get the bumps in pay that they wanted. Lane Kiffin was never considered based on Greg Byrne. I think it came down to Norvell and DeBoer. I don't think Norvell pulled his name out. I think he was told they were going with DeBoer, and it just so happened that simultaneously Florida State was working on a contract extension, so they could then immediately announce that contract extension.
But keep in mind,
but I think Norvell bolts for Bama if he gets offered the job.
At the college football playoff, they were discussing, once again, because it came up in September, it came back up in December, and then at the college football playoff, the big money that Washington was going to have to invest in DeBoer. Because he was the 6th or 7th highest paid coach in the Pac-12 last year, making about 4.2. And you're seeing all of these contracts around college football, and the AD I believe came from UCLA, was saying like, hey, yes, we're going to have to pay. Now, we're going to break the bank the way college football is breaking the bank? No, I don't know if we could do that, but we're going to make him a very wealthy coach. Florida State did exactly that with Norvell. And if I'm just thinking of the trajectory and the pay of coaches, Florida State did it, and DeBoer didn't get that version of money from Washington.
Well, DeBoer was offered 2 different contract extensions with substantial raises. One was before last season, one was during the season.
And then he cut it off.
Both down. He turned both opportunities down until after the season. It sounds to me like Kalen DeBoer was waiting on something like an Alabama to pop. I'm not saying it's Alabama specifically, but he very much wanted his options opened. And the option opened with Alabama, and he jumped at it. So I didn't get a sense of any real hesitation from Kalen DeBoer about taking the job. And that surprises me, given where he's from, South Dakota.
Yeah.
He's coached in that region. He just took them to a national championship
Big
game.
Ten.
And it doesn't, they're going to the Big Ten. It's in Seattle. They have resources there. And suddenly he didn't even give it a second thought. That's reading this article, it felt like he was foaming at the mouth to go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama and coach the Crimson Tide. It doesn't surprise me he left Washington for Alabama. But it does surprise me that it seems like he had no second thoughts about it, that he would have crawled to Alabama for that job, given everything within the story. Here's another funny anecdote about the pursuit of Kalen DeBoer. Chris Lowe says they met somewhere in downtown Seattle when they had their meeting. Can you imagine meeting in Alabama with a prospective coach and how quickly word would get out, but how anonymous you are in Seattle, Washington, even if you are the head coach of the Washington Huskies that just took your team to the national championship game, and no one's going to know who Greg Byrne is if you're out in a restaurant or a bar in downtown Seattle? No one's going to even spot you. Now imagine any of these big SEC jobs and trying to meet somewhere in that SEC city and how quickly people would spot that prospective coach and that AD together, which is wild to me.
And think about this. Greg Byrne, who I don't even know, he could walk down the street here in the heart of SEC country. I don't know if he would be recognized. He's one of the 2 men that Nick Saban has mentioned that should be involved in coming up with the system for NIL and transfer portal. That's kind of what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
The movers and shakers. Now, Greg Sankey would be recognized here.
I think Kalen DeBoer is going to wholeheartedly embrace all that NIL has to offer.
How about this, though?
And Alabama's going to play at a high level. I don't know that they're there right now, but they're going to get there in terms of money. I always go back. Tom Luganbill, friend of the show, joined us this week. I'll never forget the way he described A&M spending all that money on that recruiting class. And he said, are you sure you're getting the right player? Yes, they're highly rated prospects. But if you're getting a disproportionate amount of the players who are solely focused on money, that are just going to go to the highest bidder, no matter if it makes sense or if they like the coaching staff or whatever, I'm going to the highest bidder. If you get too many of those guys, it blows up your program, even though it is 4 and 5 stars throughout. And that's what happened at A&M. I firmly believe that. So the coaches that will excel in the new frontier and this new horizon of college football are those that can balance the money with the new ego of the college athlete about the chance to go and transfer anywhere they want and go play and make money or maybe more money elsewhere. Finding the right balance of locker room culture, leadership on the roster, with money and NIL opportunities, it's a difficult balance to strike. It really is. And those that can do it will excel in college football.
2 other thoughts. Number one, the fact that Florida State, who is cash hungry, right? They're in a lawsuit with the ACC and the grant of rights.
They won out.
They won out. They ponied up also for Mike Norvell in a very short time frame where coaches who should have crawled to Tuscaloosa based on where they had been and coached with or had connections to the University of Alabama didn't, because they felt like they could make Alabama where they were. And DeBoer should have felt the same way about Washington, because Washington actually is about to get $100 million a year through their grant of rights, through their television contract. Florida State's not, at least not yet. And their coach chose to go to Tuscaloosa, and Norvell gets paid $10 million plus to stay at Florida State, where, I mean, I would expect it to be, at least I would think, difficult for a head coach to go and recruit to right now, personally. And didn't seem to be an issue for Florida State to back their coach, one that Alabama was interested in. Dan Lanning makes a ton of sense. It also makes a ton of sense that Dan Lanning wanted to stay where he was, at Oregon.
But see, it would have made a ton of sense to me that Kalen DeBoer wanted to stay at Washington.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm surprised also, that he didn't have more of a desire to stay.
One other thing. Ryan Grubb originally was going with him to Bama and then chose to go back, and maybe it's just the area. And maybe it's the league. Chose to get out of college football when he was the hot name to replace DeBoer at Washington.
Yeah.
And instead, he was going with DeBoer to be the OC at Bama, and now he's the OC for the the Seattle Seahawks.
There's
something up there.
There's a little bit of strangeness going on with DeBoer's staff. William Inge is another guy who actually started to make calls on behalf of DeBoer at Alabama, and now he's at Tennessee. He backed out after a day or two after he took the job.
Yeah, that's right.
And he does not follow him to Alabama, and instead he's the new coach, an assistant at Tennessee for Josh Heupel. There's a couple things that are a little odd on that defensive staff.
I'm hearing odd things, though, that I've never heard from fans, though, of Bama. And I think the realization is, look, you lost Nick Saban. Nick Saban's retired. I get it. It's not going to be easy, right? But instead of, next guy up, great coach, look what he just did at Washington, he's the guy. He's the guy also that Chad just mentioned, sounds like this was the job he wanted. All of a sudden, it's like, well, he's a ball coach. He's going to come in and take the 3-star and make him a 5-star. I've never heard that.
No, you got to get 4- and 5-star guys. If you're going to win in the SEC, you're not doing it with 3 stars.
And that's the eyebrow raise for me.
Yeah, there's going to be 3 stars who turn out to be great players everywhere in the SEC, but you're not going to compete for an SEC championship or win one with a collection of 3-star talent. You're going to win with a top 10 national recruiting class at bare minimum. Likely needs to be the 1, 2, or 3 class in America consistently over 3 or 4 years. That's how Alabama's done it. That's how Georgia's won titles.
Yes.
That's how you compete in the SEC. It is player driven. One good thing for Alabama in all of this, even with some of the weird stuff going on, you just went out and hired Washington's head coach, and he didn't even think twice about taking it. It's a better job than Washington. No one's going to argue otherwise. I'm surprised there was not at least a little bit of hesitation, though, from Kalen DeBoer to stay at Washington. So that's good news for Alabama, that you can hire a team that's going into the Big Ten that just competed for a national title like that. You go in and get their head coach. That's not bad.
It's not bad, but in the same hand, not even on the same day, who knows? Norvell stays at Florida State.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
But I don't think Norvell stayed at Florida State. I think Kalen DeBoer was chosen. I think it was down, judging by this article, Greg Byrne was down to 2 guys. He said, I pursued 2 guys seriously. It was Mike Norvell and Kalen DeBoer.
One makes a lot of sense,
when we decided on Kalen DeBoer, because Mike Norvell was not telling his AD anything. They were nervous as could be that he was going to be the choice. Mike Norvell was going. He was leaving for Bama. And then when DeBoer got it, he said, okay, now let's sign an extension. The fallback plan was always, let's go ahead and wrap up this extension now. This is a better fit. I'm ready to stay. But I don't buy that with Norvell. It's a better fit. He was even quoted in the story as saying, yeah, I thought about it. You got to weigh the pros and cons, but you also got to weigh what's the better fit. I firmly believe Norvell is the head coach at Alabama if they go with him over DeBoer.
But, so as surprising as is that DeBoer didn't stay, why did Norvell stay at Florida State? Why was he hesitant to take the Bama job?
I'm telling you, I'll repeat it again, Hutton. He was not hesitant. They chose Kalen DeBoer.
Oh.
Based on what I'm reading this article, they chose DeBoer over him. I think Mike Norvell is taking that job if they offer him the job. I think their first choice became DeBoer, and that's why Norvell's still the coach at Florida State. He didn't get the Bama job. He wanted it, didn't get it.
What did they end up paying DeBoer?
That's a good question.
So they're giving him basically what Norvell got at Florida State, is my guess. The money's got to be the same.
Again,
Which
I think they chose
hefty.
DeBoer, and then Norvell didn't get it, so he had to stay at Florida State, which isn't a bad fallback plan. And the fallback plan was, I'm going to sign this extension now that we've been talking about and get locked into Florida State.
If DeBoer says no, is it Lane Kiffin?
No, it's Mike Norvell.
Or is it Loxley?
It's Mike Norvell. No, I'm telling you, it's judging by what Chris Lowe got in this reporting, it is Mike Norvell. If Kalen DeBoer says no, Mike Norvell is taking the job.
Why is this
They
story?
could have had either one, and they wanted DeBoer.
What took so long for this story to get out? This whole 48-hour circuit, as close as CeeLo is to Saban?
I think it's just in whatever timing Saban wanted the story out. Chris Lowe was always going to get it, and it was just, hey, let's give the new guy some time to adjust. We don't need some big profile about all of this. Right as he takes over, they've just
the time to get that story out is whenever Saban says, "No, you know what? Actually, I'm going to have an office here. I'm not going anywhere."
I think part of it is too. Alabama just started spring practice, so I'm willing to bet Saban said, "Let's wait until he's finished recruiting." Some of the early transfer portal stuff, and let's let them get to practice. Then we can talk about how everything went down. That's my guess, because they've had like a day or two of spring practice already.
How will DeBoer handle the locker room that Saban didn't like? That's the other key. A lot of those guys are still there. You know? That culture of, I mean, you have to lean into it now.
Yeah, you got to lean into it, but
I will say this about DeBoer. He had some really good talent, and he kept a lot of good talent, and talent followed him to different locations. You know, it started at Indiana with Michael Penix Jr., then they linked back up at Washington. You've got Rome Odunze, who is as charismatic and talented as they come. Chad, we had a chance to chat with him.
Yeah.
There's a lengthy list of talented players that went to the locker room at Washington.
I think it's going to be a rough adjustment.
I do too.
And I think that same, unless you're promoting from within with someone on Saban's staff that's a lot like him, that's been there for years, it was going to be a rough adjustment for anyone who took that job, because you're going from Nick Saban to someone else. It was just always going to be a rough adjustment. I think Alabama fans are in for a rude awakening in the next couple of years. I think this season, I don't even know what the over-under is. I'd say take the under on wins and losses. They're going to lose a game or two we're not expecting them to lose because of this transition in year one.
What's the over-under at Ohio State right now for wins and losses? Chip Kelly's now the OC, and UCLA, they wanted to move on. They finally did whenever Chip Kelly was looking for that parachute, looking for the landing spot. NFL openings came about. He was mentioned as a possibility to join the Las Vegas Raiders. That did not come to fruition. There were some other mentionings like Washington and more. Ultimately, it's the best gig. Leaves, though, one of the Power 2 conferences. Leaves UCLA as the head coach to become the OC at Ohio State. Here's Chip Kelly discussing that.
I do a lot of things other people don't do, so I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I think it started when we were preparing for our bowl game. Ryan Gunderson, who's a great quarterback coach, left to go to Oregon State as the coordinator, so he wasn't there. So I actually coached the quarterbacks during the bowl game, and I just started to think, like, I hadn't actually coached a position since 2008. And then I think my wife remarked, she's like, I haven't seen you this happy in a long time. And to me, the best part of football is football. And so you got to do football and not do some of the things that involve with the head coaching deal. And I had a chance after we beat Boise in the bowl game, and as we started recruiting, just to kind of think about what that experience was like. And then I get to make the decision on what my future is going to be. And so what do I want to do? So I started to look into, is there an opportunity? And it would have been the right spot to go somewhere and just coach a position again and be back with that group. Because I think as a head coach, you sit in on position meetings, but then you're always getting pulled out. And there's other things that are involved with with being a head coach. And I think it's more of a CEO operation right now. It's the job and the landscape, as we all know, of college football has changed. So I just thought at the time that, there's a story about John Lennon when he was a little kid that had an assignment of what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be happy. And then his teacher said, I don't think you understand the assignment. And his mom said, I don't think you understand life. So I just want to be happy. And I'm really happy coaching a position, really happy to be at this place. It would have taken a special place for me to leave UCLA because I love those players and I love that coaching staff. But to be here with Ryan, I had a great relationship. I've known Ryan since he was a little kid. So I think a lot of things just fell into place that way.
So, yeah, there's Chip Kelly discussing his new gig as OC at Ohio State. He's in the same lane, same path, maybe the same car with what Nick Saban is saying.
It's full story up at OutKick right now from Trey Wallace. Really love the John Lennon story about just wanting to be happy. I buy what Chip Kelly's saying. I think a lot of it, too, is a lack of faith from the UCLA administration that he was feeling the whole time.
Made him happy.
Yeah, that's part of it. And that's part of not making you unhappy. And it being pulled away with different NIL things and transfer portal things you deal with as the head coach all the time. For a guy that's all about ball, that wants to coach ball and wants to coach offensive football, this is a good change for him. And he likely will be a lot more happy just coaching offensive football and not worrying about as much about other things, being the offensive coordinator at Ohio State.
And that ties back into DeBoer, who is a football coach. And that's what we're hearing now. Oh, he's a ball coach. He's going to coach these. Chip Kelly said you can't do that. Nick Saban saying you can't do that. He's now the CEO of Alabama. That's why it's going to be a rough transition.
It's a CEO now with 2 or 3 extra departments than you had 15, 20 years ago, too, that you're going to manage.
In the SEC.
Yes. There's a lot more management involved for the head coach. Now, the staffs are bigger. They're hiring more people. You can delegate more because there are a lot of other people working underneath you on these football staffs. That's part of it, too. But, yeah, it's as hard as it's ever been. But the good news is they're also making more money than they've ever made before. So that's
DeBoer
part of it,
was
too.
Making an average salary in 2014 of $140,000 as an assistant coach.
Life is pretty good
now he's making $10 million plus.
Life is good.
Life is good. You can be happy doing that too.
Yes.